I never thought a simple home improvement would land me in a courtroom facing off against the most vindictive woman I'd ever met. But here I was, watching Barbara Jenkins from the Maplewood Heights HOA try to convince a judge that I was responsible for her broken wrist. My name is Xavier Kellerman, and I'd moved into the Maplewood Heights subdivision in Aurora, Colorado, about 18 months ago. The house was perfect, a 3-bedroom ranch with a decent yard and mountain views that made the mortgage payment sting a little less. I'd done my research on the neighborhood, read through the HOA documents, and everything seemed reasonable enough. Monthly dues covered lawn maintenance of common areas, snow removal on the main roads, and the community pool. Standard stuff. What I didn't realize was that Barbara Jenkins, the HOA president, treated those bylaws like they were carved into stone tablets handed down from above. The trouble started last October when I decided to install a radiant heated driveway system. I work as a software engineer, mostly from home, and the idea of never having to shovel snow again was worth every penny of the $15,000 installation cost. Colorado winters are brutal, and my driveway had a slight incline that turned into an ice rink every time the temperature dropped. I'd already slipped twice the previous winter, once landing hard enough on my back that I couldn't sit comfortably for a week. I hired a reputable company, Alpine Heating Solutions, and they started work in early October. The installation required tearing up my existing concrete driveway, laying down a network of tubes that would circulate heated fluid, and then pouring new concrete over the top. The whole process took about 2 weeks, and I was excited watching it come together. The workers were professional, cleaned up after themselves each day, and the end result looked fantastic. My driveway was smooth, even, and in a few weeks when winter hit, it would be gloriously free of snow and ice. About 3 days after the installation was complete, I came home from a grocery run to find a white envelope stuck in my front door. Inside was a formal letter from the Maplewood Heights Homeowners Association, specifically from Barbara Jenkins herself. The letter informed me that I was in violation of Section 4.7 of the HOA bylaws, which stated that any exterior modifications to properties required written approval from the HOA board before commencement of work. I was being fined $500 and ordered to appear before the board at their next meeting. I read through the letter 3 times, feeling my blood pressure rise with each pass. I pulled out my copy of the HOA bylaws and found Section 4.7. Sure enough, it was there in black and white. But as I read further, I found subsection 4.7.3, which specified that the approval requirement applied to modifications that altered the external appearance or structure in a way visible from the street or neighboring properties. My heated driveway looked identical to a regular concrete driveway. There was nothing visible about the heating system at all. It was entirely beneath the surface. I called the HOA office the next morning. A bored-sounding woman named Patricia answered and transferred me to Barbara after I explained why I was calling. Barbara's voice came through the line with the kind of cheerful hostility that only years of petty authority can cultivate. "Mr. Kellerman, I'm glad you received our letter," she said. "I trust you understand the seriousness of this violation." "Actually, I'm calling because I don't believe it is a violation," I replied, keeping my voice level. Section 4.7.3 specifically states that approval is needed for visible modifications. My heated driveway is completely invisible. It looks exactly like any other concrete driveway. There was a pause, and I could practically hear her lips pursing through the phone. "The modification itself is what requires approval, Mr. Kellerman, regardless of visibility. You've altered your property's infrastructure without permission. That's not what the bylaw says, Mrs. Jenkins. I've read it carefully. Then you'll have the opportunity to present your interpretation to the board at our meeting on November 3rd at 7 in the evening. The fine stands until the board rules otherwise. Good day, Mr. Kellerman. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there staring at my phone, realizing I'd just made an enemy. The board meeting was held in the community center, a bland building near the neighborhood entrance that also housed a small gym and the pool equipment. I arrived 10 minutes early with printed copies of the relevant bylaws, photos of my driveway showing how it looked identical to my neighbor's driveways, and the contract from Alpine Heating Solutions showing the work was completed to code with all proper permits from the city. The meeting room had about 15 people scattered across folding chairs facing a long table where the board members sat. Barbara was front and center, flanked by 4 other board members I recognized from around the neighborhood but had never actually spoken to. To her right was Dennis Murphy, a retired accountant who always wore polo shirts tucked into khaki pants. Next to him was Linda Hoffman, a thin woman in her 60s who taught piano lessons from her home. On Barbara's left sat Tom Bradshaw, who owned a plumbing business, and Sarah Chen, a nurse who worked night shifts at the hospital. Barbara called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel, and they worked through various neighborhood business for about 40 minutes. Someone complained about a barking dog. There was a discussion about replacing the pool heater. A proposal to add speed bumps on Willow Creek Drive was tabled for further study. Finally, Barbara's eyes landed on me. Item 7 on tonight's agenda. Mr. Xavier Kellerman, regarding his unpermitted driveway modification. Mr. Kellerman, would you like to address the board? I stood up and walked to the front, passing out my prepared materials. Thank you. As you can see from these photos, my new driveway is visually identical to the old one and to every other driveway in the neighborhood. I had a radiant heating system installed beneath the concrete, which required replacing the driveway surface, but there's no visible modification whatsoever. Barbara didn't even look at the photos. The point, Mr. Kellerman, is that you didn't seek approval before beginning the work. Because according to Section 4.7.3, I didn't need approval for an invisible modification. The bylaw is very clear. Dennis Murphy was actually looking through my materials. He glanced at Barbara, then back at the papers. He might have a point, Barbara. This subsection does specify visible alterations. Barbara's face tightened. The spirit of the rule is that we need to know about major modifications to properties in our community. Heated driveways could set a precedent. Next thing you know, everyone will want one, and our power infrastructure might not handle it. The system uses a closed-loop hydronic system heated by my natural gas water heater, I interjected. It doesn't impact the electrical grid at all, and even if it did, that would be a city infrastructure issue, not an HOA concern. Tom Bradshaw nodded slowly. I've actually installed similar systems in some of my commercial jobs. They're pretty standard technology, nothing dangerous about them. I could see Barbara's jaw clenching. She wasn't used to being contradicted, especially not with other board members siding against her. Nevertheless, the board needs to vote on whether this constitutes a violation. All in favor of upholding the fine. Barbara's hand shot up immediately. After a long moment, no one else raised their hand. The other 4 board members all kept their hands down, and Linda actually shook her head slightly. Motion fails, Dennis said, sounding almost apologetic. No violation. The fine is rescinded. Barbara's face went through several shades of red. This meeting is adjourned, she snapped. banging her gavel hard enough that I worried she might crack the table. I gathered my materials and headed for the door, feeling victorious but also uneasy. The look Barbara had given me as I left suggested this wasn't over. I was right. 2 weeks later, I received another letter. This one informed me that the HOA was implementing new guidelines requiring written approval for any work performed on HOA properties that required city permits, regardless of visibility. The rule would take effect January 1st, and as a courtesy, the board was offering to grandfather in my heated driveway system if I paid a $500 administrative review fee. I called my lawyer friend, Marcus, who practiced real estate law in Denver. After I explained the situation, he laughed. "They can't retroactively fine you for something that wasn't against the rules when you did it," he said. "Tell them to pound sand. If they try to enforce it, we'll bury them in legal fees." I sent a polite letter declining to pay the administrative fee and citing the ex post facto principle that they couldn't retroactively enforce new rules. I got no response, which I took as a small victory. Then November rolled into December, and Colorado's winter arrived with a vengeance. We got 14 inches of snow on December 8th, and I had the supreme satisfaction of watching my neighbors shovel their driveways while I simply flipped a switch on my control panel and watched the snow melt away like magic. The system worked even better than advertised. Within an hour of the snow stopping, my driveway was completely clear and dry. Barbara's house was 4 doors down from mine on the same street. I'd see her sometimes when I was checking my mail or taking out the trash. She never waved, never acknowledged me at all, just stared with those cold eyes like she was calculating something. The Friday before Christmas, we got another major snowstorm. This one dumped about 10 inches overnight and the temperature dropped to 5 degrees. School was canceled. The main roads were plowed by mid-morning, but most people in the neighborhood were still digging out their driveways. Not me, of course. My driveway was its usual clear, dry self. I was working from home that day, on a video call with my team going over some code issues when my doorbell rang. I muted my mic and went to answer it. Barbara Jenkins stood on my porch wearing a puffy white winter coat and boots, her breath coming out in visible puffs. "Mr. Kellerman, we need to discuss your heating system," she said without preamble. "Mrs. Jenkins, I'm actually in the middle of a work call. Can this wait?" "No, it cannot. I've been receiving complaints from neighbors about the runoff from your driveway creating ice hazards on the sidewalk." I stepped out onto my porch and looked at the sidewalk. The snow had been cleared by the HOA's contracted service, and there was no ice anywhere near my property. "I don't see any ice. It's creating unsafe conditions. That heated driveway is melting snow that then runs onto the sidewalk and freezes." "Mrs. Jenkins, basic physics says that water runs downhill. My driveway slopes toward my yard, not toward the sidewalk. And even if it did, the whole point of the system is that it keeps the temperature above freezing. The water doesn't freeze. It just evaporates or soaks into the ground." Her eyes narrowed. "I'm warning you, Mr. Kellerman. If someone gets hurt because of your careless modification, you'll be held liable. Is there anything else? Because I really need to get back to my meeting." She turned and walked away without another word, her boots crunching in the snow on my walkway. I watched her navigate down my front steps and onto the sidewalk, which was completely dry and clear. She walked back toward her house with stiff, angry movements. I went back inside feeling unsettled. The threat had been pretty clear. She was looking for a way to make me pay for embarrassing her at the board meeting. Christmas came and went. I flew back to Ohio to spend a few days with my parents, and when I returned on December 28th, there was another envelope in my mail. This one was from a law firm in Aurora, representing the Maplewood Heights HOA. They were officially demanding that I cease operation of my heated driveway system immediately due to safety concerns, and pay a fine of $1,000 for creating hazardous conditions. I forwarded the letter to Marcus. He called me back within an hour. "This is garbage," he said bluntly. "They have no grounds for this. Have there actually been any incidents on your property?" "None. My driveway is always clear. There's no ice anywhere near it." "Then ignore this. It's a scare tactic. If they actually file suit, we'll countersue for harassment and recover your legal fees. This Barbara person sounds like a real piece of work." New Year's came, and with it, another significant snowfall. January 4th brought 8 inches of fresh powder, and temperatures hovered around 15 degrees all day. I was feeling pretty smug about my heated driveway as I watched the snow melt away while I drank coffee and watched the news. Around 2 in the afternoon, there was a loud banging on my door. Not a knock, a full-on pounding like the police were serving a warrant. I rushed to the door and opened it to find Barbara Jenkins on my porch again, but this time she looked different. Her face was contorted in pain, and she was cradling her left arm against her body. "You're going to pay for this," she hissed at me. "I'm calling my lawyer and the police. You're going to pay for everything." "What are you talking about? What happened?" "I slipped on the ice your driveway created and broke my wrist. This is all your fault." I looked past her at my front walkway and driveway. Both were completely clear and dry. "Mrs. Jenkins, where exactly did you slip?" "Right there." She pointed vaguely toward the sidewalk with her good hand. "The ice from your driveway." I stepped out onto my porch in my socks and looked at the area she'd indicated. The sidewalk was clear and dry. There was no ice anywhere. "Mrs. Jenkins, I don't see any ice, and I don't understand why you were on my property in the first place." "I was walking by and slipped on your ice." "Stop playing dumb." A few neighbors had come out of their houses, drawn by the commotion. I recognized Bill Thompson from 3 houses down and Maria Garcia from across the street. "Mrs. Jenkins, you should probably go to the hospital and get that looked at," I said carefully. "But I'm telling you right now, there's no ice on my property. Look for yourself." She looked like she wanted to hit me with her good hand. Instead, she turned and stormed off, nearly slipping for real on a patch of snow in her own yard. I watched her get into her car and drive away, probably headed for the emergency room. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding. Then I remembered something. I'd installed security cameras 6 months ago after someone had stolen a package from my porch. I had cameras covering my front door, driveway, and part of the sidewalk. If Barbara had actually slipped on my property, it would be on video. I went inside and pulled up the camera footage on my laptop. I scrolled back through the afternoon and found the relevant section. At approximately 1:53 in the afternoon, Barbara Jenkins appeared on camera walking down the sidewalk past my house. She was looking at my clear driveway with an expression of pure frustration. She stopped, looked around to see if anyone was watching, and then deliberately walked up my driveway toward my front door. My driveway was bone dry. Not a trace of ice or water anywhere. She walked up to my porch, and then something strange happened. She looked directly at one of my security cameras, seemed to realize she was being recorded, and her whole expression changed. She walked back down the driveway, and when she reached the sidewalk, she looked around again. Then she walked about 20 feet further down the sidewalk, past my property line, to a section of sidewalk in front of the vacant lot between my house and Bill Thompson's place. That section of sidewalk hadn't been shoveled as well, and there were some icy patches visible even on the camera footage. Barbara looked around one more time, took a deep breath, and then deliberately stepped onto an icy patch. Her feet went out from under her, and she fell hard onto her left side. I watched her lie there for a moment, then struggle to her feet, cradling her arm. She walked back toward my house and up to my front door, where she started pounding. I sat back from my laptop, stunned. She deliberately injured herself to try to frame me. This was beyond HOA petness. This was fraud, and depending on how far she took it, possibly insurance fraud and filing a false police report. I saved the footage to 3 different locations, including a cloud backup, and called Marcus immediately. "You need to see this," I told him, and sent him the video file. He called me back 10 minutes later. "Holy hell, Xavier, this woman is insane. She deliberately hurt herself. That's on video clear as day." "What do I do?" "First, document everything. Write down exactly what happened today with times. Keep that video safe. If she files a police report or tries to sue you, we have absolute proof that she's lying. This is actually good for you, as twisted as that sounds. She's just handed you a slam-dunk defense and probably grounds for a countersuit." "Should I go to the police first?" Marcus paused. "Not yet. Let's see what she does. If she's smart, she'll realize she can't win this and drop it. But given what you've told me about her, I'm guessing she's not that smart." He was right. 2 days later, I received a notice that I was being sued in small claims court by Barbara Jenkins for medical expenses, pain and suffering, and lost wages totaling $8,000. The claim stated that I had negligently created hazardous conditions on my property that directly caused her to slip and break her wrist, and that I had failed to maintain my property in a safe manner, despite multiple warnings from the HOA. I forwarded everything to Marcus, and we prepared our defense. The court date was set for February 15th, which gave us plenty of time to get our evidence in order. In the meantime, word spread through the neighborhood about the lawsuit. Opinion was split. Some people thought Barbara was right to hold me accountable if my heated driveway really was creating ice hazards. But a lot of people, especially those who'd been on the receiving end of Barbara's HOA enforcement over the years, were skeptical. Bill Thompson stopped by one evening with a 6-pack of beer. "I heard about the lawsuit," he said as I let him in. "Look, I've lived in this neighborhood for 12 years, and Barbara has been a nightmare the entire time. She fined me $300 once because my grass was a 1/4 inch too tall. A 1/4 inch. She measured it with a ruler. That's insane. That's Barbara. Anyway, I just wanted you to know that a bunch of us are on your side. If you need character witnesses or anything, let me know." I thanked him and cracked open a beer. It felt good to know I wasn't alone in this. The weeks leading up to the court date were tense. I kept my heated driveway running, partly because I'd be damned if I'd let Barbara intimidate me into not using something I'd paid good money for, and partly because every day it ran without incident was more evidence that it wasn't a safety hazard. We had 3 more snowstorms in January, and each time my driveway performed flawlessly. No ice, no runoff problems, no incidents. Barbara, meanwhile, was milking her injury for all it was worth. She wore her cast like a badge of honor, and made sure everyone in the neighborhood knew she'd been seriously injured due to negligent property maintenance. She sent out an email to the entire HOA membership, warning them about the dangers of unauthorized home modifications, and reminding everyone that the HOA had tried to prevent this exact situation. Marcus and I prepared our case methodically. We had the video footage, of course, which was our smoking gun. But we also gathered weather reports showing the temperature and conditions that day. Photos of my property showing the lack of any ice or hazardous conditions. Expert testimony from the engineer, who designed my heating system, explaining why it couldn't create the ice hazard Barbara was claiming, and statements from several neighbors who'd walked past my house that day and seen no ice. We also filed a counterclaim against Barbara for malicious prosecution, filing a false claim, and harassment. Marcus thought we had a good chance of not only getting her lawsuit dismissed, but also recovering damages and possibly even getting her removed from the HOA board. February 15th finally arrived. I put on my best suit and met Marcus at the courthouse in downtown Aurora. Small claims court in Colorado allows for lawyers, though many people represent themselves. I was glad to have Marcus with me. He'd handled hundreds of these cases and knew all the procedures and tricks. We arrived early and found seats in the hallway outside the courtroom. Barbara showed up 15 minutes later with her own lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in her 40s carrying an expensive briefcase. Barbara still had her cast on, though by my calculation, it should have been ready to come off soon. She saw me and immediately looked away, whispering something to her lawyer. When our case was called, we filed into the small courtroom. Judge Patricia Reynolds presided, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who'd been on the bench for over 20 years according to Marcus's research. She had a reputation for being fair but intolerant of nonsense, which Marcus said was good for us. Barbara's lawyer, who introduced herself as Jennifer Morrison, presented their case first. She painted a picture of a reckless homeowner who'd installed a dangerous heating system without proper approval, creating hazardous icy conditions that the HOA had repeatedly warned about. She presented Barbara's medical records showing a fractured wrist that had required surgery to pin, along with bills totaling just over $6,000. She had statements from Barbara describing how she'd slipped on ice directly in front of my property. She even had photos of my heated driveway with melting snow, trying to show how it could create runoff. Your Honor, Mr. Kellerman was warned multiple times that his heating system was creating dangerous conditions, Morrison argued. He ignored these warnings, and my client suffered a serious injury as a direct result. She's entitled to compensation for her medical expenses, her pain and suffering during recovery, and the wages she lost during the 6 weeks she was unable to work. Judge Reynolds listened impassively, taking notes. When Morrison finished, she turned to us. Mr. Kellerman, or should I say Mr. Fletcher, you're representing the defendant, Marcus stood. I am, Your Honor. And if it please the court, the defense would like to present video evidence that directly contradicts the plaintiff's claims. Morrison objected. Your Honor, we weren't notified about any video evidence during discovery. We sent notice of our intent to present video evidence 3 weeks ago, Marcus countered smoothly. It's in the court record, Defense Exhibit A. Judge Reynolds checked her files and nodded. The notice is here. Objection overruled. Let's see this video. Marcus had brought a laptop and a small projector. He set it up quickly and queued up the security footage. The courtroom went silent as the video played, showing Barbara deliberately walking past my clear, dry property, moving down the sidewalk, and then intentionally stepping onto ice and falling in a completely different location. Judge Reynolds leaned forward, watching intently. When the video finished, she looked at Barbara with an expression of deep disapproval. Miss Jenkins, is that you in the video? Barbara's face had gone pale. Your Honor, that's not what it looks like. I was disoriented from the fall and confused about where it happened. The timestamp on this video shows this occurring minutes before you appeared at Mr. Kellerman's door, Judge Reynolds said coldly. And it clearly shows you deliberately stepping onto ice that is not on Mr. Kellerman's property. Miss Morrison, do you have any explanation for this? Morrison looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. Your Honor, I was not aware of this footage. If I had been, I would never have brought this case forward. I should think not. Judge Reynolds turned back to Barbara. Miss Jenkins, do you understand that filing a fraudulent claim in this court is a serious matter? You've wasted this court's time, Mr. Kellerman's time, and your own lawyer's time, not to mention attempting to defraud Mr. Kellerman. It's not fraud, Barbara protested, but her voice was weak. I did fall, and it was because of the conditions his heating system created. Marcus stood again. Your Honor, if I may present additional evidence, we have weather reports from that day showing the temperature was well above freezing in the afternoon when this incident occurred. We have expert testimony explaining that Mr. Kellerman's heating system cannot create ice hazards due to its design. And we have multiple witness statements from neighbors who walked past Mr. Kellerman's property that day and observed no ice or hazardous conditions. He passed up folders containing all of our evidence. Judge Reynolds spent several minutes reviewing it, her expression growing increasingly stern. I've seen enough, she finally said. Miss Jenkins, your claim is dismissed with prejudice. Not only did you fail to prove that Mr. Kellerman was negligent, but the evidence clearly shows you deliberately injured yourself in a location that had nothing to do with his property, and then attempted to blame him for your injuries. This is fraud, plain and simple. Barbara started to speak, but Judge Reynolds held up her hand. I'm not finished. Mr. Fletcher, I understand you filed a counterclaim. We have, Your Honor, for malicious prosecution, filing a false claim, harassment, and legal fees. We're seeking compensatory damages of $10,000 plus legal costs. Judge Reynolds nodded. Given the egregious nature of this fraud, I'm inclined to grant your counterclaim. Miss Jenkins, you are ordered to pay Mr. Kellerman $10,000 in damages plus his legal fees, which will be calculated and submitted to the court within 30 days. Additionally, I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for potential criminal charges related to filing a false claim and attempted fraud. Barbara's face went from pale to bright red. You can't do that. This is outrageous. What's outrageous is your behavior, Miss Jenkins. You deliberately injured yourself, and then attempted to extort money from an innocent party through fraudulent legal proceedings. Be grateful I'm not holding you in contempt right now for wasting this court's time. Morrison was gathering her papers quickly, clearly wanting to distance herself from this disaster as fast as possible. Your Honor, I request permission to withdraw as counsel for the plaintiff. Granted. This case is concluded. Next case. We filed out of the courtroom. Marcus was grinning ear to ear. That went even better than I hoped. She's going to be on the hook for at least $15,000 by the time we calculate all the fees. I felt a surge of relief mixed with disbelief. I can't believe she actually did this. She hurt herself deliberately just to try to get back at me. Some people can't handle being wrong, Marcus said. She got so fixated on punishing you for defying her that she lost all perspective, and now it's cost her big time. We walked out of the courthouse into the cold February afternoon. I felt lighter than I had in months. It was finally over, but actually, it wasn't quite over yet. The ripples from the court case spread through Maplewood Heights like wildfire. Within days, everyone in the neighborhood knew what had happened. The video footage, which was public record, got shared around, and people were shocked and appalled by what Barbara had done. An emergency HOA meeting was called for February 22nd. Over 60 residents showed up, which was about triple the normal attendance. The mood was angry. People wanted answers about how someone as unstable as Barbara could have been given so much power over their community. Dennis Murphy, as vice president, ran the meeting. He looked uncomfortable as he addressed the crowd. I know everyone has questions about the recent court case involving Barbara Jenkins. The board has discussed this matter, and we've decided that Mrs. Jenkins's position as HOA president is no longer tenable. She's been asked to resign from the board effective immediately. There was a murmur of approval from the crowd. Bill Thompson stood up, asked to resign. She committed fraud and tried to frame a neighbor for an injury she deliberately gave herself. She should be forcibly removed and banned from ever serving on this board again. Several people applauded. Dennis nodded. The bylaws require a vote of the membership to forcibly remove a board member. We can hold that vote tonight if there's a motion. I so move, Bill said immediately. I second, Maria Garcia called out. The vote was nearly unanimous. Out of the 63 residents present, 61 voted to remove Barbara from the board and prohibit her from holding any HOA position for a period of 10 years. The only votes against were Barbara's next-door neighbor, an elderly woman who probably didn't fully understand what was happening, and Barbara's adult son who'd shown up to support his mother. Barbara herself wasn't present. According to the gossip, she'd barely left her house since the court case. Her husband, a quiet man named Richard whom I'd seen maybe twice, apparently wasn't speaking to her. The whole thing had apparently caused major problems in their marriage on top of everything else. The district attorney did end up pressing charges against Barbara. In April, she pleaded guilty to filing a false police report and attempted fraud, both misdemeanors. She was sentenced to 6 months probation, a $5,000 fine, and 100 hours of community service. She also had to pay restitution to me for the full amount the judge had awarded, plus legal fees, which came to just over $17,000 total. The money came through in May. I used part of it to take a nice vacation to Hawaii, and I donated $5,000 to a local charity that helped low-income families with home repairs. It felt good to turn something negative into something positive. Barbara and Richard put their house up for sale in June. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Richard had filed for divorce, and Barbara was moving back to Nebraska to live with her sister. The house sold quickly, and by mid-July, they were gone. A young couple with 2 kids moved in, and they were friendly and normal and didn't seem to care at all about my heated driveway. The HOA under new leadership was much more reasonable. Dennis took over as president and immediately proposed revising the bylaws to be less restrictive and more focused on genuine community issues rather than petty enforcement. The changes passed overwhelmingly. The new rules still required approval for major visible changes to properties, but there was a clear, objective standard for what required approval and what didn't. Underground improvements like my heating system were explicitly exempted. As summer turned to fall and then winter came around again, I found myself reflecting on the whole bizarre situation. It had been stressful and expensive and time-consuming, but in the end, justice had prevailed. Barbara had let her need for control and her wounded pride drive her to do something truly crazy, and she'd paid the price for it. My heated driveway continued to work perfectly. When the first snow of the new winter arrived in November, I stood in my garage with a cup of coffee, watching the snow melt away on contact with my warm driveway. Several neighbors walked by and waved. Bill Thompson stopped with his snow shovel and called out, "You're living the dream, Xavier." I laughed and raised my coffee cup in salute. It's the small things, Bill, the small things. And really, that was the truth of it. I'd bought a house in what I thought was a nice, normal neighborhood. I'd made a reasonable improvement to my property that made my life easier and safer. And I'd run headlong into someone who couldn't stand seeing someone else do what they wanted. someone who needed to control and dominate everyone around them. But I'd stood my ground. I'd followed the rules, knew my rights, and when I was attacked unfairly, I defended myself with facts and evidence. And in the end, the truth had won out. Barbara's lies and manipulations had crumbled in the face of simple video evidence of what had really happened. The experience taught me a lot about dealing with difficult people and standing up for yourself. It also taught me the value of security cameras, which I'd highly recommend to anyone dealing with a problematic HOA or neighbor. That video footage had saved me from what could have been a much more complicated and expensive legal battle. Life in Maplewood Heights returned to normal, or what passed for normal in a suburban HOA community. There were still occasional disputes about barking dogs or holiday decorations, or where people parked their cars, but nothing rose to the level of the drama Barbara had created. Dennis and the new board handled issues fairly and reasonably, and the neighborhood felt genuinely friendly for the first time since I'd moved in. I stayed in touch with Marcus, and we actually became real friends rather than just lawyer and client. He thought the whole case was hilarious in retrospect, and occasionally used it as an example when teaching young lawyers about the importance of video evidence in civil cases. Always check for cameras, he'd tell them, and never assume your client is telling you the whole truth. As for Barbara, I heard a few updates over the following months. The divorce went through, and it was apparently messy. Richard got the house sale proceeds and most of their assets because Barbara's legal problems and fraud conviction had made her the at-fault party. She was working retail in Omaha and living in a small apartment. Her son, who'd initially supported her, had stopped speaking to her after learning the full truth of what she'd done. She'd lost her marriage, her home, her reputation, her position of authority, and the respect of her children, all because she couldn't let go of a petty grudge. Sometimes I felt a little sorry for her. The rational part of my brain knew that she'd brought all of it on herself through her own actions, but it was still a stark fall from grace. Then I'd remember her pounding on my door, falsely accusing me, the threatening letters, the lawsuit, and the deliberate fraud, and the sympathy would evaporate. She'd had so many opportunities to back down, to be reasonable, to accept that she'd been wrong. Instead, she doubled down at every turn, until she'd literally injured herself just to try to hurt me. That wasn't someone who deserved pity. That was someone who'd earned every consequence that came her way. The holidays came around, and the neighborhood association threw a Christmas party at the community center. It was actually fun, something I'd heard never happened when Barbara was in charge. She'd apparently insisted on such strict rules for the party that people stopped coming, preferring to celebrate privately rather than deal with her regulations about decorations and food and music. This year, with Dennis running things, it was casual and welcoming and genuinely festive. I brought a homemade dish and some wine and spent the evening chatting with neighbors I'd barely known before. People asked about my heated driveway, and I was happy to give them the details about installation costs and energy usage, and how well it worked. A few people were seriously considering getting their own systems installed. I gave them Alpine Heating Solutions contact information and suggested they make sure to get HOA approval first, even though it wasn't technically required, just to avoid any potential hassles. Though honestly, with Dennis in charge, I can't imagine there'd be any problem, I added. He's actually reasonable. Bill Thompson overheard and laughed. That's the nicest thing you could say about an HOA president. Actually reasonable. We should put that on a plaque. As the party wound down and people headed home through the gently falling snow, I felt genuinely grateful for how things had turned out. Yes, I'd had to deal with months of stress and harassment. Yes, I'd had to spend time and money defending myself against fraudulent accusations. But I'd also learned that I was capable of standing up for myself against bullying and intimidation. I'd learned who my real friends and allies were, and I'd helped create positive change in my community by forcing out someone who'd been making everyone miserable for years. My heated driveway, the innocent cause of all the drama, continued to do its job perfectly. Every time it snowed, every time the temperature dropped and ice formed on other driveways, mine stayed clear and safe and dry. It was a daily reminder that I'd made the right choice, both in installing the system and in defending my right to use it. Winter deepened, and we had some truly brutal storms. One blizzard in January dropped over 20 inches of snow and shut down the entire Denver metro area for 2 days. Schools closed, businesses closed, even the highways were shut down. But when the storm finally passed and the sun came out, my driveway was clear. It took longer than usual, and the system worked overtime to melt that much snow, but it handled it. Meanwhile, my neighbors were out with shovels and snowblowers, laboring for hours to dig out. Several of them stopped by afterward to tell me I'd convinced them. 3 households ended up installing their own heated driveway systems that spring. Alpine Heating Solutions gave me a referral discount, which was a nice bonus. The company owner, a guy named Pete, told me I was his best advertisement. "Nothing sells a product like seeing it work in real conditions," he said. By the time the 1-year anniversary of the court case rolled around, the whole incident felt like ancient history. Barbara was gone. The HOA was functional and reasonable. My driveway continued to work great, and life had returned to a pleasant routine. I'd gotten a promotion at work, started dating someone I really liked, and was thinking about adopting a dog. The legal aftermath dragged on a bit longer. Barbara's probation lasted 6 months, and I heard she struggled to complete her community service hours because of work schedule conflicts. She tried to appeal the restitution amount, claiming financial hardship, but the court denied her appeal. The money had to be paid, and it came through in installments over several months as her wages were garnished. I put most of it in savings, but I did spend some on a really nice security camera system upgrade. The new cameras had better resolution, night vision, and longer storage capacity. If I ever had to defend myself in court again, the footage would be crystal clear, though I hoped I'd never need it. One fraudulent lawsuit was more than enough for one lifetime. Marcus and I had lunch occasionally, and he always got a kick out of retelling the story of Barbara's spectacular courtroom defeat. "You should have seen the judge's face," he'd say, shaking his head. "I've been practicing law for 15 years, and I've never seen someone so thoroughly destroy their own case. Most people at least try to maintain their lies. She couldn't even do that when confronted with video evidence." Spring arrived, bringing warmer weather and the end of snow season. I turned off my heated driveway system and went back to using my driveway like everyone else. But I knew that come next October, when the first freeze warnings appeared in the forecast, I'd flip that switch again with a sense of satisfaction. I'd fought for the right to use my system, and I'd won. That made it even better. The young couple who'd bought Barbara's old house, Jake and Amanda, became good friends. They had 2 little kids who loved playing in my yard, and Amanda was an excellent baker who often brought over cookies or muffins. Jake worked in construction and appreciated the engineering that went into my heated driveway. "That's quality work," he'd said when I showed him the control system. "Expensive, but worth every penny if you hate shoveling like I do." They had no idea about the drama that had taken place before they moved in, and I saw no reason to tell them. Why burden them with the neighborhood's ugly history? They'd formed their own opinions of everyone, and as far as I could tell, they liked living in Maplewood Heights. That was what mattered. Summer was glorious. I used some of my restitution money to upgrade my back patio, putting in a nice stone fire pit and comfortable outdoor furniture. I hosted several barbecues, and the neighborhood really did feel like a community for the first time. People relaxed and enjoyed themselves without the constant worry that Barbara would appear with a clipboard and a list of violations. Dennis proved to be an excellent HOA president. He focused on the things that actually mattered, like making sure the common areas were maintained, the pool was clean and safe, and the snow removal service did their job properly. He didn't care about petty nonsense like grass height or unapproved mailbox colors. The neighborhood flourished under his leadership, and property values actually increased as word got out that Maplewood Heights was a desirable place to live with a reasonable HOA. In August, I got a surprising phone call. It was a reporter from a Denver newspaper who'd heard about the case and wanted to do a story about HOA overreach. I was hesitant at first, but Marcus thought it might be good to get the story out there. HOAs need oversight, he said. Too many of them are run by petty tyrants like Barbara. If your story can help other people stand up to unreasonable HOA demands, that's a good thing. I agreed to the interview. The reporter, a sharp woman named Kelly, came to my house and spent 2 hours talking to me about what had happened. She interviewed Marcus too, and Dennis, and several of my neighbors. The article ran in mid-September with the headline HOA President's Fraud Attempt Backfires Spectacularly. It was fair and accurate, and it generated a lot of attention. I got emails and calls from people all over Colorado who'd had their own HOA horror stories. Some were looking for advice, others just wanted to share their experiences. It was eye-opening to realize how common this kind of abuse was. HOAs were supposed to protect property values and maintain standards, but too often they became vehicles for busybodies and control freaks to impose their will on everyone else. The article also caught the attention of a state legislator who was working on HOA reform legislation. She reached out to ask if I'd be willing to testify at a committee hearing about the need for stronger oversight and clearer guidelines for HOA powers. I agreed, and in October, I found myself in the state capitol building, telling my story to a room full of legislators and lobbyists. The bill eventually passed, creating new protections for homeowners against overzealous HOAs and establishing clearer procedures for disputing fines and regulations. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step in the right direction, and I was proud to have played a small part in making it happen. As November arrived and the weather turned cold again, I prepared my heated driveway system for another winter of use. I checked all the connections, tested the controls, and made sure everything was working properly. The first significant snow came on November 18th, and once again, my driveway cleared itself while everyone else shoveled. It never got old. Looking back on everything that had happened, I realized that Barbara's vindictive crusade against me had actually led to a lot of positive changes. The HOA was better run and more reasonable. State laws had been strengthened to protect homeowners. My neighbors had come together as a real community, and I'd learned important lessons about standing up for myself and not backing down in the face of bullying. Barbara had set out to punish me for defying her authority, and instead she'd lost everything while I'd come out ahead. There was a certain poetic justice to that. Sometimes the universe has a way of correcting itself, of making sure that people who act badly face consequences for their actions. It doesn't always happen quickly, and it doesn't always happen at all, but when it does, it's deeply satisfying. I still lived in Maplewood Heights. My heated driveway still worked perfectly. The neighborhood was peaceful and friendly. And Barbara Jenkins was gone. Her reign of petty tyranny ended by her own reckless actions. Life was good, and every time I looked at my snow-free driveway on a winter morning, I was reminded that doing the right thing and standing your ground, even when it's difficult, usually works out in the end. The story could have ended badly. I could have been intimidated into ripping out my heating system or paying unjust fines. Barbara could have gotten away with her fraud if I hadn't had security cameras. The lawsuit could have gone differently if I'd had a less competent lawyer or a less fair judge. But none of those things happened. Instead, truth and justice prevailed, and a bully finally faced real consequences for her actions. That was the real lesson of the whole experience. Bullies count on people being too tired, too scared, or too intimidated to fight back. They expect that if they push hard enough, people will just give in to avoid the hassle. But if you document everything, know your rights, stand your ground, and refuse to be intimidated, bullies usually crumble when confronted with reality. Barbara had built up this self-image of herself as the all-powerful HOA president, whose word was law. When that image crashed against the reality of a judge who saw through her lies, she had nothing left to fall back on. As winter settled in and the holidays approached again, I found myself thinking about how much can change in a year. 12 months ago, I'd been stressed and worried about a lawsuit, unsure how it would turn out. Now I was happy, settled, and living in a neighborhood I actually enjoyed. Barbara's attempt to ruin my life had failed completely, and in the process, she'd ruined her own. I didn't take pleasure in her downfall exactly. It was more a sense of relief that justice had been served and that she couldn't hurt anyone else anymore. People like Barbara exist everywhere, in every community and organization. They seek out positions of minor authority and then abuse that authority to feel important and powerful. The only way to stop them is to stand up to them, document their abuses, and hold them accountable when they cross the line. My heated driveway, the simple home improvement that had started everything, continued to be the best investment I'd ever made. Not just because it saved me hours of shoveling every winter, but because it had taught me that I was stronger than I'd thought, more capable of fighting back against injustice, and more willing to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult and expensive and stressful. Every cleared driveway was a small victory. Every winter morning when I walked out to my car without having to navigate ice and snow was a reminder that I'd fought for something and won. And every time a neighbor thanked me for helping get rid of Barbara, I was reminded that standing up to bullies doesn't just help you. It helps everyone they've been tormenting. As I sat in my living room on Christmas Eve, watching snow fall gently outside while my driveway stayed clear and dry, I raised a glass to myself and to everyone who'd supported me through the ordeal. To Marcus, who'd been a brilliant lawyer and a good friend. To Bill and Maria, and all the neighbors who'd stood up at that meeting and voted to remove Barbara from power. To Dennis, who'd proven that HOA leadership could be reasonable and fair. And to Pete and his crew at Alpine Heating Solutions, who'd installed a system that worked so well it had sparked a legal battle. But most of all, I raised my glass to the simple principle that people should be able to make reasonable improvements to their own property without being harassed by petty tyrants. To the idea that truth matters and that lies eventually get exposed. To the importance of standing your ground when you know you're right, even when it's hard. And to the sweet satisfaction of watching karma finally catch up with someone who truly deserved it. The snow continued to fall, and my driveway continued to stay clear. Life in Maplewood Heights was peaceful. Barbara Jenkins was gone, her brief reign of terror over. And I was exactly where I wanted to be, in a home I loved, in a neighborhood that had finally become what it should have been all along. A place where people could live their lives in peace, make their homes better, and not worry about some power-hungry HOA president with a personal vendetta making their lives miserable. That was worth fighting for. That was worth every moment of stress and every dollar spent on lawyers. And I'd do it all again in a heartbeat if I had to, because some things are worth standing up for, no matter the cost.